Well, good morning, everyone. My heart is full of rejoicing. So many wonderful memories as I come back to City Center and join with you today. Great kindness expressed to me and my family during our ministry years, and that continues to this day. We are so grateful. My purposes this morning in our time together will be to just update you a little bit on our family situation, provide a bit of report of our ministry, and then we will look into the Word of God together. So first, our family. Karen can't be with me today, but this was the only time in our schedule when we could fit in, believe it or not, kind of a family gathering. And so she's at home in Guelph preparing. Our son Nathan and his wife Tiffany are anticipating in just a week's time a move to Vancouver. And so we're going to miss them. You're supposed to all go, "Aw." And this is a great move. It's wonderful for them, but we will miss them. And so they are doing well. By the way, we have no grandchildren yet, so we're still anticipating. Our middle son, Adam, is in Virginia and working there and loving life. And you may have heard that our daughter, Emma, was married about a year and a half ago and resides in Guelph as well. She and her husband, Graham. So on the family front, we're grateful. God is blessed. And let me talk a bit about FAIR, Fellowship Aid and International Relief. What I need to say to you this morning is thank you. Thank you that you have allowed me and trusted me to be one of your mission representatives. And so I'm grateful for your prayers. And those of you that just express that you're praying, it means everything. I could not travel. I could not minister in situations unless I know that people are praying for me. So thank you. Thank you for your significant financial commitment to my ministry, because that encourages during, I say, heavy periods or dark days. And it's just good to know the support from this church family. Pastor Derek, I'm grateful for your leadership, for the team that you've assembled here, and just for the way that things are going so well here at City Center. God bless you. Continue to just be propelled in His power in the days to come. FAIR, as you know, is the humanitarian arm of our 511 churches across Canada for our fellowship. And our desire is to extend the love of Christ through relief, rehabilitation, and development. Our mission is to alleviate suffering and social injustice in our world, and that is a big deal. There's so much that we need to do. But let me speak to the Alberta wildfires in Fort McMurray. This was a situation that just happened so rapidly and so suddenly. We have a church there, North Life Fellowship Baptist Church. Pastor Les Summers leading the ministry, and a great ministry team. They normally operate a soup kitchen from that location, and the church has been spared from the fire, and they will continue to use funds that we collect to be a springboard for ministry through that location, as well as their church plant situation about a half an hour south. They're not allowed back into the community, into the area. They don't know when that will be. But when they do, they are devising a ministry plan that will allow them to take these funds and bless the people of their community. And we're praying that good and godly stories would come from this, where people's hearts are turned to Christ as a result of them sharing this love. And so you have information there if you care to respond. I'm grateful that Pastor Derek was one of the first pastors to talk to our president and thank him for our response in this situation. Of course, we all know about the refugee crisis. It was last August when a little boy's body washed up on a shore in an attempt by his family to escape the Syrian regime. And this devastating story really brought to the forefront this mass of humanity that's moving across Europe. And we have a two-pronged approach, short-term and long-term in terms of ministry. Short-term, we are ministering with partnering with an organization called Operation Mobilization. They have been serving in Middle East countries for decades. Their ministry of meeting practical needs as well as sharing the gospel. One of their workers was standing receiving refugees on shore in Greece when two brothers said, "Thank you. Could you tell us about Jesus?" They had been prompted by God, whether through a dream, I don't know, but they were wanting to know about this person, Jesus. This worker invited the two brothers to his home. They shared a meal. He said, "I'd like you to watch this video, the Jesus film." Both opened their hearts to receive Jesus. Our vision as an aid agency or department is to alleviate suffering and to facilitate social development in our world. This is a big, big task. In order to do that, we partner with like-minded organizations as well as churches like City Center. And one of the organizations that we've recently formed a partnership with is International Justice Mission. My wife and I will be leaving early Wednesday morning. We're traveling Hong Kong en route to the Philippines. We'll be in Cebu and joining IJM on a trip that will allow us to envision what takes place at their Cebu headquarters or office, rescuing children out of the sex trade, young lives abused, just horrific situations where people are offending these little ones. And this organization helps us to help our churches realize there are terrible injustices being done in our world, but we can do something about it. We can speak against it. IJM particularly not only rescues young children out of this situation, counsels them and helps them to get back into a proper way of life. It brings to justice those who are the perpetrators. And so they work with local authorities, with lawyers, and bring this about. It's a wonderful situation. We would like you to know about our video teaching series called Your Kingdom Come. And this will be available to your church, and you can learn more about this in the coming days, helping our churches understand biblical justice. One of the ways in which we partner with local churches like City Center is what I would call in terms of cooperation. Maybe we would peg it at the lowest level. And so a local church hears of a disaster situation somewhere in the world. It could be an earthquake. It could be the Alberta wildfire. And they say, are we doing something? And we, within a short period of time, communicate to our churches, yes, this is what we're doing. We're collecting funds. We're working with this organization. And so churches send a check to us. Recently, the Ecuadorian earthquake and the Japan earthquake are examples of where we have worked with organizations on the ground to meet and alleviate human suffering. Another way or level of churches participating with us is what we would call through coordination, and that is facilitating already existing aid programs. And these aid programs are brought about by our missionaries who are on the ground. Our Fellowship International missionaries tell us that there are ways and means through humanitarian projects that will allow the gospel just to be propelled forward, and it acts as a bridge. I would like to say that on the table in the foyer you'll find these catalogs, but it seems the early bird gets the worm, and so the first service people just cleared me out of everything there. So we will send a new supply, and Pastor Derek will let you know that you can have these catalogs. I mention them because they are listed in alphabetical order of small, bite-sized aid programs according to country and missionaries that have listed them, how you can participate. It's very easy. It's not onerous. I gave an example in the early service of a church in Montreal, the children's program came and presented me with one of these large cardboard checks, $3,000 for something they read about called the sand flea project. Sand fleas get in under the fingernails and toenails of children in Africa, and if not treated, they could lose a finger. They could lose a toe. But it's very easily treatable. One tablet, very inexpensive. And so for a very small cost on our part, we can do something to alleviate this situation. That's what the kids at the church in Snowdon did in this situation. There's another way in which we see churches, and this might be the highest level of participation with us, it's collaboration, where a church will coordinate with us in such a way and collaborate with us in such a way to say, you know what, we're not in some of the countries where you are focused. Our focus is here, and our focus is this particular ministry. Could you help us put something together that will minister in that situation? We're happy to do that. Here's one situation. In Honduras, a children's home named Casa Hogar. The ministry there, street kids. They have no care. They're fed. They're ministered to. They're given an education. They're loved in the name of Christ in this home. In this collage of pictures, you'll see a perimeter wall, brightly colored. That was not there. A men's group from Fort McMurray, the church that I mentioned before, a men's group heard about the need because gangs and drugs are prevalent in Honduras. These gangs had gone in and kind of pillaged the children's home. One of the workers had her hand slashed. This men's group said, you know what, that's not right. They collected $80,000. That perimeter is over 1 kilometer in length. Not a small project to see that put together. So that was a way in which they said, hey, we can do something about this. Can you help us? Another church on the East Coast in Nova Scotia, they go every year with a team. And what they do is various projects. Here is a picture of a veggie garden in a greenhouse. They said these kids need nice, fresh veggies to eat. And so irrigation system, greenhouse, wonderful what they've been doing each year as they've gone in this way. The next slide takes you to Haiti, and I love this picture of these school children. Their smiling faces, their eagerness, but this wasn't always the case for these children. A church in Montreal came to us and said, we're concerned about the children in an area of Haiti called Dondon. These children were not knowing when they went to school where their next meal was going to come from. And so this church has devised with us a feeding program. Over 700 children on a daily school day basis get one hot meal a day. As a result, these children, their attention span has gone up. Their school marks have skyrocketed. Can you see that FAIR is doing so much more than just feeding children? I'm blessed to be a part of helping to coordinate things of this nature. In Pakistan recently, our women and children's hospital there was having some need. Walls were cracking, roof was leaking. They needed new facilities for new doctors that would be coming to stay. And so we put out an appeal. $75,000 was needed to do some of this refurbishing and work. And although you might think that this is just ministry into bricks and mortar, it's so much more than that. Happy to report to you that as people have donated, we've gone above $90,000 to help in this way. So much more beyond bricks and mortar, because I traveled with some of the ministry leaders there at the hospital out into 17 villages that are impacted. They do evangelism. They do teaching to the village leaders. as we sat on one of those low beds and shared and ate with them in their village. Some 200 people in one family village. It was incredible to me, the openness of these village leaders to the gospel. Every Christmas, they are gathered together at the hospital for a Christmas presentation. God is working in the hearts and lives of these people. And it's through this ministry point of the Shikarpur Christian Hospital that lives are being changed for Jesus. I mentioned Poland, and we have a very small appeal to help in something very similar to what you're doing this summer at City Center, to help bring kids to Christ through sports camps. And so our desire is that our churches in Canada here would partner with us to help see the ministry needs of these summer camp programs touch young lives for Christ in Poland. All of what I've been sharing with you this morning can be found on our website. You have our contact information there, fellowship.ca. You need to look for FAIR, and you can donate, you can gain information. As I said, take anything that's left. I apologize that there's not more. You'll have to blame those 9 o'clock people for taking it all ahead of time. But thank you for supporting me and allowing me to share a progress update about FAIR this morning. I want to talk this morning about living the great requirement. Living the great requirement. It was about 30 years ago that something sort of went off or snapped in the head of the lead singer of the Irish group U2. Bono and his band, that many years ago, was playing one of these Live Aid events at Wembley Stadium in England. And the whole purpose was to raise funds for the Ethiopian famine that had been taking place. And not only was it well attended, there was another 1.5 billion people watching this concert through video feed. And it turned out to be an amazing event, profoundly moving for everyone, but particularly for Bono. Soon after that event, he and his wife, Ali, jumped on a plane. They headed for the Horn of Africa. Bono said he wanted to see what the tumult was all about, and he wanted to get rid of those images of starving people that he saw on TV out of his head. It's something they did privately, it's something they did quietly, and they would spend a good portion of that summer working at an Ethiopian feeding camp. And he said, and he was never the same since. His words, this issue particularly is overwhelming because we're trying to counter the effects of the past 400 years of history. It can be hugely discouraging when you look at it that way. But in my view, the better response to the challenge is to ask, what can we do now to make a difference? What can we do now to make a difference? And so my challenge to you this morning, in the time that we have, is for you to make a difference in the lives of someone you may have never met or you may never, ever meet. You see, when we consider just the overwhelming humanitarian needs in our world, it's very easy for us to become jaded. It's very easy for us to turn off all the appeals that come through email, through mail, through people like me. And we're tempted to believe that the very little that we can contribute is meaningless. But it was Jesus who said that even a cup of cold water given in his name would not be without reward. And that reward could come from a life saved physically or spiritually. It comes through a sense of satisfaction from obeying Jesus' command, but surely, it will come when we walk through the gates of heaven and realize that Our cup of cold water is included in that when Jesus says, "Well done, thou good and faithful servant. You've been faithful in the little things, I'll put you in charge of many things." And so there's a verse tucked away in the Old Testament prophet Micah chapter 6 and verse 8 that I'd like us to look at this morning. One of the passages. It says this. When we ask the question, well, what should I do? Or I don't know what to do. Really, the prophet puts it this way. He has shown you, O man, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? To act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. In his book, Jesus on Justice, Don Postursky has written about some very familiar terms that we in sort of church lingo understand. He talks about the Great Command. The Great Command means that we should love God and love others. He talks about the Great Commission found in Matthew 28, that we should go and disciple the nations. But then this term, the Great Requirement, got stuck with me, and I needed to understand more. He says the great requirement is to seek justice. The great requirement is framed as one command with three parts. He puts it this way: walking humbly with God, positioning ourselves wisely with Him, expressing kindness and mercy. In other words, we behave compassionately toward others. And finally, pursue justice. We advocate where we can in our society in a bold sense. Some of you, when I mention the term oppression, might have a hard time thinking of people that you know today that are oppressed. It's happening in our country. It's happening around the world. Give you an example. A pastor friend of mine in the Vancouver area, while he was planting a church, had a young single mom come to him with a dilemma. She said, "My landlord, he's willing to lower my rent because I really can't afford the rent I'm paying. He'll lower my rent, but he wants me to sleep with him. It's not right." But this kind of thing happens. And so what I believe the Scriptures are calling us to do is when we hear of oppression and situations like this in our world, we who can do something about it need to speak about it. We need to say, that's not right. That's wrong. Because I believe there'll be greater judgment for us who have been in positions where we could do something and we do nothing. That's on our head. You know, as we delve a little deeper into Micah 6 and verse 8, Timothy Keller in his book, Generous Justice, helps us to understand this is a summary of how God wants us to live. This would just be a normal way of life for us. Walking humbly with God, being tuned into all that He desires and loves. To do justice and to love mercy. He says, some people say that that's kind of confusing. It seems like they're two different things, but they're not. He mentions the term for mercy, chesed in the Hebrew. God's unconditional grace and compassion. And the term for justice, mishpat. And it puts the emphasis on the specific action, whereas chesed puts the emphasis on the attitude or the motive behind the action. So to walk with God, then, we must do justice out of this merciful love. You see, Jesus, all through His ministry, was all about caring for the spiritual and social well-being of others. This wasn't sort of an add-on. It wasn't a secondary thought to His ministry. Near the end of His ministry, Jesus called Himself an advocate and promised to send us another one called the Holy Spirit. The good news is that Jesus continues to be an advocate for us today. In 1 John chapter 2, he says, I'm writing these things to you so that you may not sin. But if anyone does sin, we have an advocate with the Father, Jesus Christ, the righteous. Aren't you so grateful for that? Our God is a God who cares for the suffering and the needy and the abandoned. And he models what we, his followers, need to be and covers his instructions with a promise of blessing. If you can shift over to the book of Isaiah or back to the book of Isaiah chapter 58, there's a section of scripture there. The entire chapter is wonderful. You'll need to read it on your own, but particularly these verses that are tucked away in Isaiah 58 is a wonderful promise. Find your place at verse 8 and 9. The prophet says, Then your light will break forth like the dawn, and your healing will appear quickly. Then your righteousness will go before you, and the glory of the Lord will be your rear guard. Then you will call, and the Lord will answer. You will cry for help, and he will say, Here I am. It's a wonderful promise. But this promise comes surrounded by the call from God for us to engage in acts of compassion and justice in a world where such things at times seem in very short supply. And so in verse 7 of Isaiah 58, he focuses on the issues of hunger, homelessness, nakedness. And he writes this, If you will spend yourself on behalf of the hungry and satisfy the needs of the oppressed, then your light will shine or rise in the darkness. Verse 10. Folks, I'm not here to say that our organization is the only one. I believe that it is a trusted one of your family of fellowship churches. But it offers an opportunity. It offers a way for you to engage in what the Scripture's calling us to do, to practice compassion and justice. And so it allows you through a myriad of possibilities from which you can choose as you understand what we're doing, a way to have a positive kingdom impact on people who will benefit from your generosity. The story is told by Timothy Keller of a pastor preacher from many years ago, Jonathan Edwards. Jonathan Edwards was the minister of a congregational church in Northampton, Massachusetts in the years 1729 to 1751. And you go, wow, that's a long time ago. How could anything that man be relevant to today? Interesting. Because in the year 1733, he preached a sermon entitled, The Duty of Charity to the Poor. And the heart of that sermon was really a set of answers to a series of common objections that Edwards heard from his hearers, from his congregants, when he would talk about these things. Here's the first objection. The objection is, though they be needy, they are not in extremity. In other words, they don't look that bad. They're not really destitute, these people. Or to put it in our terms, all the poor people I know on my side of town, they all have TV sets. Another objection that he cited was this, from people who say, I don't really have much to spare. I don't really have anything. It's hard enough for me to make ends meet. To which Edwards helped them to understand this takes sacrifice. It's not just that we're rolling in the dough. It hurts to help people in need. Thirdly, he said the poor person This person is just, they got a bad temper. They're ungrateful. And so really, the situation these people find themselves in, they brought it on themselves. In other words, they made their bed, make them lay in it. It's all their fault. And I think we live in a dream world where we want to help people, but we want to help the kind of person that will fall all over us and say, thank you, thank you, thank you for feeding me, thank you, you've saved my life. To which I want to say, wake up. That is a dream. Very rarely will you find that attitude in people that you seek to help. You may. But just as often, you're going to be confronted with the harsh reality of ungratefulness. That should not deter us from what God's calling us to do. And fourthly, he said, these poor people, they don't have any moral fiber. They don't have any uprightness to their character. They're just not nice people. To which Edwards quickly pointed out, you know what? That was you before you met Christ. And Christ demonstrated his love to us in that while we were yet sinful, Christ died for us. You remember the story of the Good Samaritan. The story that Jesus told of a man on his way from Jerusalem to Jericho fell upon hard times because he was accosted. Robbers beat him, robbed him, left him naked on the side of the road, basically to die. The story tells us that there were religious people that went by and really did not stop to help this person. And Jesus' point in telling this story was that the one you would least expect it, the one who had really no dealings with the Jews, a Samaritan, was the one who showed love and compassion. It was the one that took the time to not only just stop, but to go the extra mile for this person. Jesus said, of the people that I described in this story, who's really the good neighbor? It was hard for the Jewish crowd to say, well, the Samaritan, but that was Jesus' point. And the Good Samaritan is a person that we are so grateful for today, but do you realize that Jesus is the Good Samaritan? In that he stooped down, he came from all the glories of heaven, came here to earth and rescued us from the ditch where we were beaten and slaves of sin. Jesus isn't just the Good Samaritan, he's the Great Samaritan. He's the Great Samaritan because from what Jesus has stooped and done for us, we receive salvation so full, so rich, so free. And Jesus says, as I have done this for you, you minister for me. He's the Great Samaritan. I know this church teaches and preaches salvation. Maybe today will be the day of salvation for you. To open your heart to what the Great Samaritan offers you. That you would say, I need to key in to what Jesus means, who he is. But as you key into that and receive Christ into your life, you need to live as Jesus would want you to live in terms of being people of the great requirement. There's a story told of a European queen several centuries ago who went to a play, went to a theater, and her coachman drove her in the middle of winter to this theater. And the coachman sat outside during the coldness of the winter while she attended the theater. The drama was so heart-wrenching that the queen sobbed through this performance. She was just so wrapped in it. But when she returned to the carriage, she discovered that her coachman had frozen to death. and she didn't shed a tear. She was deeply moved by the fictional tragedy of the theater, but completely untouched by the real one she was directly involved in and even directly responsible for. And so it amazes me that so many people today become emotionally involved in a movie, reality TV, or whatever it is, a song. We weep over these things, but we show no concern for the injustices that are being done down the street or around the world. And so when you think about it, and I know, folks, your heart is there, but there are kids in Cebu that are being tortured. And we can do something about it. So, why am I saying all this? To make you feel bad? Not at all. I'm saying this to say we can do something. We can do our fair share. We can do our little bit to alleviate human suffering, to help bring the end to some of these horrors for just one child. And so this morning, how different it might be if you would say, Lord Jesus, you've touched my heart. Now I want your heart to control my life. And so in acts of compassion, in acts of justice, you can boldly step in where you've not done so before. Here's what I need you to do. You need to be better informed about our ministry. Thank you for supporting me, but go on to our website. Read about the ministry of FAIR. You can take material, what's left this morning, but would you continue to pray for me? Ministering and traveling in our world these days is not easy. It's getting more dangerous. I really need your prayers for this. I'm a little bit apprehensive about this trip on Wednesday because Karen is joining me. It's her sort of first international trip. It's not that she's not flown before. She has, but I'm just saying into another country like this. So I'm apprehensive. Pray that God would graciously help us as we travel and that we would be a blessing as I share, as I speak. And then finally, God is moving each of you to do something different today. You're either going to be better informed or your heart is being touched and you're going to say, I want to do something. I would just say, be generous in what God is calling you to do. And lives will be changed and hearts will be blessed. Thank you for allowing me to share. Thank you for your part in our ministry. God bless you here at City Center in these days.